In the final weeks before the world's most expensive sporting tournament ever held reached its opening matches, city officials in Arlington, Texas sat down for a council meeting and received news that nobody in that room was prepared to hear. More than 350,000 tickets for matches at AT&T Stadium were still unsold. Not a small shortfall, not something that could be absorbed with confidence. 350,000 empty seats across 9 World Cup matches. A single stadium, one city. The figure captured something that institutional communications had spent months trying to obscure. The most commercially aggressive World Cup in history was facing a demand problem so severe that it threatened to reshape the entire financial model the governing body had built around this tournament. This is a story of what happened when FIFA treated a global sporting event as purely an extraction opportunity rather than a celebration. It is a case study in commercial overreach, dynamic pricing failure, and the moment when market signals became impossible to ignore. It is also a warning about what happens when an organization with institutional power decides that maximizing extraction matters more than maintaining trust with the people whose participation makes everything possible. The World Cup 2026 had been positioned as unprecedented. Unprecedented scale. Unprecedented commercial opportunity. Unprecedented demand. 3 nations hosting. 80 matches. Prices set at levels that had never been attempted before. And for the first time in the tournament's history, dynamic pricing introduced into the ticketing system. Dynamic pricing works on a simple principle. Prices shift based on demand signals. High demand, high price. Low demand, lower price. It is a model used by airlines, hotels, and concert venues. It extracts maximum revenue from a market by pricing each seat based on what the market will bear at that moment. FIFA introduced it here promising that it would ensure fair access and efficient market clearing. What it actually produced was something very different. Let's start with what the numbers actually showed in the weeks before the tournament opened. Analysis of pricing movement across the main ticket categories showed an average increase of around 34% between the opening of sales and the weeks immediately before the tournament began. Supporters who had budgeted based on prices they saw when they first looked found those prices substantially higher when they returned. That price volatility created a specific kind of market psychology. If prices are rising unpredictably, rational behavior is to wait, to hold, to see if the price drops before committing. That pattern of behavior multiplied across thousands of potential buyers directly created the sluggish early-stage demand that the tournament was experiencing. The model that was supposed to extract maximum commercial value had done the opposite. It had suppressed early purchasing. But that was only the beginning of the problem, because alongside the pricing volatility, something else was happening on the governing body's own ticketing platform that generated its own distinct wave of concern. Analysts who tracked ticket inventory for major sporting events observed that around 74,000 tickets were available through the official platform in the days before the tournament. Then, between one observation and the next, the number fell dramatically, 74,000 to 44,000, then to under 30,000 in a short period. The drop happened without explanation. The founder of the tracking service that monitors this data was direct about what the numbers showed. There was no plausible scenario in which the drop was due to fans suddenly purchasing 40,000 tickets. Something else had happened. The tickets had disappeared from view. Speculation among analysts and supporters focused on 2 possibilities. Either the tickets had been allocated to sponsors, corporate partners, or other parties effectively removed from public sale, or the inventory had been deliberately made less visible in order to manage the perception of demand. This is a practice known as artificial scarcity. You restrict the visible availability of a product even though inventory exists. The restriction creates the impression of higher demand than actually exists. It makes people feel urgency. It justifies higher prices. The Attorneys General of New York and New Jersey, whose formal investigation into FIFA's ticketing practices was already underway, had identified exactly this kind of behavior as a concern. Their subpoenas cited allegations of artificial scarcity and the management of visible ticket inventory in ways that create false impressions about what is actually available. FIFA offered no explanation for where the 40,000 tickets went. The tickets simply disappeared from view. Their disappearance in the week before the tournament opened became one of the most discussed and contested aspects of the entire pre-tournament period. An organization hosting the world's most expensive sporting event was managing its communication in ways that suggested something had gone wrong, and that transparency was not the priority. Now here's where things change, because into this environment of unsold seats in Dallas, empty warm-up venues in Tampa, and mysteriously vanishing inventory on the official platform, an episode arrived that managed to be simultaneously absurd and revealing. About 60 football supporters discovered through the governing body's own website that they had somehow purchased World Cup tickets for nothing, $0. They went through the checkout process. They received official confirmation. The price charged was $0. For a brief, extraordinary moment, roughly 60 people had the greatest bargain in World Cup history. Then FIFA contacted them. On June 3rd, the governing body sent each affected supporter an email explaining that a checkout error had resulted in their tickets being allocated at no charge due to a prior payment issue during the process. FIFA said it regretted the inconvenience. It also said the tickets remained reserved, but that supporters had exactly 7 days to pay the correct original price or lose their seats entirely. Think about what that sequence communicates to the supporters who experienced it. You went through an official process on the official platform. You received official confirmation of a purchase. Then the organization running the tournament reversed that confirmation and demanded the money it felt it was owed. FIFA's system produced an error that benefited the supporter. FIFA's response was to cancel that benefit and demand payment. That episode landed with particular force, given what was simultaneously happening on the resale market. At the moment FIFA was demanding payment from 60 supporters who had benefited from a glitch, resale listings for the World Cup final were appearing on official platforms for $2.3 million per ticket. Not $2,000, not $20,000. $2,299,998.85 per seat for 4 seats side by side behind the goal at MetLife Stadium in New Jersey. A governing body chasing 60 supporters for tickets priced at $0, while allowing final tickets to be listed at prices no human being outside a small fraction of the global population could consider captured something real about the economics of this tournament. But here is the critical insight. The glitch and the resale prices are not separate failures of the ticketing system. They are both products of the same underlying structure, a dynamic pricing model that creates an environment where prices shift unpredictably, where the visible gap between face value and resale value becomes enormous, where the mechanisms of the market consistently work against the ordinary supporter and toward the commercial interests of the institution, and the resale intermediaries who profit from its decisions. This is extraction. Pure extraction, not value creation for the supporter, not celebration of the game. Extraction. The resale situation generated its own extraordinary pattern. For certain group stage matches, lower-profile fixtures that hadn't captured widespread supporter interest, resale prices fell sharply. One match dropped below $100 on the secondary market. Several others showed hundreds, in some cases thousands of available seats, well below face value. In some cities, and for some fixtures, the tournament that sold itself on unprecedented demand was visibly oversupplied relative to the buyers willing to meet its asking price. The market was sending a clear signal. At these prices, demand was not meeting supply. The tournament had overestimated what people would pay. The historical comparison that matters most here is a Club World Cup staged in the United States the previous summer as a deliberate test run for this tournament. That competition produced images that circulated widely, sprawling, empty sections in stadiums that were supposed to demonstrate North American football's readiness. In Atlanta, one match drew fewer than 25,000 people to a stadium holding more than 70,000. The pricing model that had driven away supporters from the smaller tournament was in all its essential features the same model being applied to the larger one. The lessons were visible. The adjustment, if it happened, was insufficient. What is remarkable about the sequence is not that demand problems emerged. Major sporting events sometimes face demand challenges. What is remarkable is that the organization responsible ignored the signals. The Club World Cup had clearly demonstrated that North American audiences were price-sensitive and that oversupply at high prices would result in empty venues. FIFA had the information. FIFA had the data. FIFA had the warning. What FIFA did was apply the same strategy to a larger tournament with higher prices and hope that scale would make the difference. An analysis of what happened in England provides a useful window into what the empty seat problem actually looked like in practice. On June 6th, 5 days before the tournament opened, England played a warm-up match against New Zealand at Raymond James Stadium in Tampa, a 69,000-seat venue, one of the largest stadium capacities in North American sport. For this match featuring England, one of the most globally followed football nations with players of genuine international profile, 13,000 tickets had been sold. 13,000 in a 69,000-seat stadium. More than 50,000 seats were empty. More than 50,000 for an England match in an American city 5 days before the World Cup began. The comparison that immediately presents itself is what happens when England play at home. The 80,000 supporters who filled Wembley to watch a friendly match. The atmosphere that those matches are remembered for. The contrast between that and 13,000 in Tampa is not a minor discrepancy. It is a measure of the distance between where supporters wanted to be and where the tournament's pricing, logistics, and political climate had placed them. The calculation for a traveling England fan is straightforward. Category 1 seats for England's opening group match cost £1,431. At those prices, you spend what you have on the tournament matches. You do not spend again on a warm-up. You factor in the additional travel costs, and you make a decision. Around 3,500 supporters were expected to travel officially. Actual attendance at the warm-up was in the low thousands. The image of 50,000 empty seats in a stadium that was supposed to signal the arrival of World Cup fever in American football cities was not the preview anyone had planned. The response from the American head of government to the pricing situation was one of the most unexpected public interventions of the entire pre-tournament period. A president not generally associated with sympathy for international football supporters publicly criticized the governing body's ticket prices, describing them as predatory and taking aim at the organization's commercial practices. When the man who awarded a peace prize to the governing body's president at the World Cup draw ceremony is publicly attacking that organization's ticket pricing, the signal about how far public sentiment had moved is unmistakable. This was not a fringe complaint. This was institutional failure recognized at the highest level of the host nation's government. Now consider what this means from a business perspective, because this is where the case study becomes instructive for anyone managing commercial strategy in any high-stakes environment. FIFA operated with what economists call information asymmetry. FIFA knew the pricing model. FIFA knew the demand signals. FIFA knew the Club World Cup had produced empty stadiums. FIFA knew ticket sales were sluggish. Supporters did not have access to all that information. They were operating with incomplete data, making purchasing decisions based on incomplete information, while the organization responsible for the tournament had complete visibility into the actual demand picture and chose not to adjust. The governing body had institutional power. It had pricing power. It had information power. And it used all of that power to extract as much commercial value as possible in the short term, without regard for the longer-term consequences. This is a specific kind of commercial failure. It is not a failure of execution. It is a failure of judgment about what the market would bear, and a failure of institutional wisdom about the difference between extraction and value creation. What FIFA did was treat the World Cup as a one-time liquidation event rather than an asset that derives value from repeated use and institutional trust. If you treat something as a one-time liquidation, you extract maximum value immediately. You do not care about the sustainability of the model or the long-term health of the relationship with the people whose participation makes everything possible. If you treat something as a long-term asset, you price it in ways that build participation, that build loyalty, that build a condition for future events to succeed. FIFA chose extraction. The result was 350,000 unsold tickets in Dallas in the final weeks before the tournament. Tens of thousands of empty seats in Tampa. Resale prices so volatile that the same seat could be worth $100 or $100,000, depending on the match and the timing. Visible inventory problems that undermine confidence in the tournament's appeal. A formal investigation by 2 state attorneys general into the organization's ticketing practices. and a head of state publicly calling the organization's pricing predatory. The question now is whether FIFA will take any genuine lessons from what the empty seats are telling it. The answer matters because the 2026 World Cup ran the most commercially aggressive ticketing model in the competition's history. It introduced dynamic pricing for the first time. It set face value prices at levels that placed significant portions of the tournament beyond the reach of ordinary supporters. It generated a